Looking back, I never thought a simple rule could nearly cost my daughter her life. My name is Nicole, and this is the story of how a gate, a rule, and one woman's stubbornness almost changed everything. I often think about how much life can change in a single year. A year ago, I was living in a modest suburban home with my husband Marcus and our daughter Maria. We'd been married for just over a decade, and we'd built a life that I thought would carry us into old age. A comfortable place, a stable routine, and a feeling that even though there were always challenges, we could handle them together. But fate had other plans. Marcus was diagnosed with stage 4 colon cancer 18 months ago. The symptoms started subtly. He'd complain about stomach cramps and a bit of fatigue here and there. At first, we brushed it off as stress from work or maybe a passing virus. We never imagined it could be something more sinister. But as the weeks turned to months, the pain grew worse and he began losing weight. Tests, referrals, scans, it all rushed by in a blur. And then came the terrible confirmation: cancer. In that moment, every petty worry became meaningless, overshadowed by the reality of our new fight. Over the course of his treatment, I watched him battle with everything he had. He tried chemotherapy, special diets, and an avalanche of prescription medications. He kept his spirits up, joked with the nurses, and always held my hand during the darkest moments. But the disease spread faster than any of us expected. By the time we realized that the treatments weren't working, it was too late for clinical trials or alternative methods. 5 months ago, he passed away in the hospital with me by his side, my hand clasped in his, tears rolling silently down my cheeks as I tried to be strong for him in his final moments. Losing Marcus was like losing a chunk of my own identity. I was no longer Marcus and Nicole, that stable, grounded couple. Suddenly, I was just Nicole, a single mother to a bright-eyed 9-year-old girl who adored her father. Maria knew her dad was sick, but children never truly grasped the full scope of cancer. She would sit by his bedside, sometimes coloring or showing him her paintings. On good days, he'd muster enough energy to read to her or watch one of her favorite cartoons. On bad days, she tried to be strong by being quiet, offering him tissues or water. We told her as gently as we could that he might not get better, but I'm not sure any child can fully wrap their mind around losing a parent until it happens. After the funeral, I realized that everything in our old neighborhood, every street, every neighbor, every local store, reminded me of my husband. The bench by the park where Marcus and I used to sit, the grocery store where we always did Sunday shopping, even the squeaky porch step that he had always promised to fix. It was all so filled with memories that I'd find myself unable to step outside without dissolving into tears or being overwhelmed by a flood of grief. So, I made a decision. I would move, give Maria and me a fresh start somewhere else, someplace where I didn't see ghosts of what we had lost every time I turned a corner. Packing up our lives wasn't easy. Every item seemed to have a story attached to it, a memory, a moment frozen in time. The sweater Marcus always wore around the house, the mug with a chip on its rim from our first apartment, and even the mismatched dining chairs we had picked up at a garage sale when we first got married. I kept some things for Maria and myself, things I knew we'd want to hold on to. The rest, I donated or sold. As painful as it was, I felt like every item I let go of lightened the burden just a little. And when moving day arrived, I stood in the middle of an empty house, took a deep breath, and said goodbye to the only life I had known for the last 11 years. Our new home was a small rental in a quiet, unfamiliar neighborhood on the other side of town. It was nothing fancy, just a 2-bedroom house with a small yard and a white picket fence that had seen better days. But it was ours. I spent the first few weeks getting everything set up, hanging curtains, painting Maria's room her favorite shade of lavender, and making the space feel like a home. I hoped the fresh start would help both of us heal, or at least help me find some stability in the chaos. One of the first things I noticed about the neighborhood was the house next door. It was large and imposing, painted a deep shade of blue with white shutters that seemed to gleam in the sunlight. A tall wooden gate separated our yards, and a no trespassing sign was nailed to its surface. Despite its polished appearance, the house gave off an air of isolation, like whoever lived there didn't want to be bothered. I saw glimpses of the woman who owned it, middle-aged, with dark hair streaked with gray, but she never came over to introduce herself. She always seemed to be working in her garden or tinkering with something behind that gate. Maria, being the curious child she was, couldn't resist peeking through the slats of the gate whenever we were out in the yard. "Who do you think lives there, Mom?" she'd ask, her big brown eyes wide with wonder. "Maybe she's a witch." I'd chuckle and tell her not to let her imagination run wild, but part of me felt uneasy too. There was something about that house and its mysterious owner that made me want to keep my distance. It was a hot day in late summer when everything changed. I had been cleaning out the garage, sweat dripping down my back, when I heard Maria's voice calling from the backyard. "Mom, come see. There's a kitten." I dropped what I was doing and hurried outside. Sure enough, there was a small gray kitten perched on our side of the gate, meowing pitifully. Maria knelt beside it, her hands hovering as if unsure whether to touch it or not. "Can we keep it?" she asked eagerly. But before I could answer, the gate creaked open, and the woman from next door stepped out. The woman from next door stood in the opening, her eyes narrowing slightly as she took in the scene. She wore a wide-brimmed straw hat, dirt-streaked gardening gloves, and a faded blue apron. Despite her somewhat stern expression, her gaze softened when it landed on the kitten. "That's Oliver," she said, her voice low but clear. "He's mine. Likes to wander off sometimes." She crouched down and reached out for the kitten, who gave a tiny meow of recognition before scampering over to her. She lifted him with practiced ease, cradling him against her chest. Maria's face fell in disappointment. "I thought we found him." "I wanted to keep him," she said softly. The woman looked at Maria for a long moment, then back at me. "He's a curious little one," she said, a hint of a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "I suppose he could come over for visits. If you're okay with that." Maria's eyes lit up. "Really?" I gave a hesitant smile. "That's very kind of you." "Thank you." "I'm Eleanor," the woman said, brushing some dirt off her gloves before offering a hand. "Lena," I replied, shaking her hand. "And this is my daughter, Maria. Nice to meet you both." Eleanor's gaze flickered briefly toward our house, as if sizing us up. "If you need anything, you know where to find me." She turned, kitten still cradled in her arms, and disappeared through the gate. Over the next few days, Oliver the kitten became a frequent visitor. He would wriggle through a gap in the fence and pad over to our porch, where Maria would greet him with open arms. Eleanor didn't seem to mind and would even stop by occasionally to check on him. Each visit was brief, but I started to notice little changes in her demeanor. The aloof, distant woman I had first met was beginning to show cracks in her armor. One afternoon, after dropping Maria off at school, I found Eleanor sitting on our shared fence, sipping a cup of tea. She waved me over. "I'm making another batch of lemonade," she said. "Care to join me?" I hesitated for only a moment before nodding. Maybe this fresh start was about more than just a new house. It was about new connections too. The weeks passed, Eleanor, Maria, and I settled into an unexpected rhythm. Oliver continued his daily visits, bridging the once silent gap between our homes. The tension I had initially felt about moving here slowly melted away with each shared moment on our porches and in our gardens. One particularly golden evening, Eleanor invited us over for dinner. The air was filled with the scent of freshly baked bread and lemon from her backyard trees. Maria and Oliver played together by the flower beds while Eleanor and I sat on her porch swing, watching them. "It's funny," Eleanor said after a moment of comfortable silence. "I used to think I liked being on my own. But maybe what I really needed was a little noise." She smiled, soft and genuine. I returned her smile. "I know what you mean. We didn't just need a new house. We needed new friends." Maria ran up, laughing and breathless. "Oliver wants to stay the night." Eleanor laughed, a sound that was freer than I'd ever heard from her. "Well, I suppose that's settled then." As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the yard, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: peace. We weren't just in a new house. We were home.